So, welcome to this presentation that will talk about William Kilpatrick and Paulo Freire, two great curricular theorists. Kilpatrick is our first one. He was born in the rural South, specifically in Georgia, during the Reconstruction era, which certainly had an influence on his life, as I'm sure he saw some of the Jim Crow laws around in his life, which led him to where he was in terms of his theories of education. Which he was a student of John Dewey, so he was a member of the progressive movement of the 1920s and 1930s. Um, and he helped spread progressive education throughout America. Some of his key works: he was the editor of a leftist journal called New Leader. And what he did with Dewey's work, so Dewey, the well-known curricular theorist of the progressive movement, the child center movement, and Kilpatrick added a little bit more behaviorism to the theory of progressive progressive thought. And specifically, he focused on what we know today as a project method or project learning, and that was stems from Kilpatrick's work with building off of Dewey's work. This was all in the early 1920s and 1930s. The idea was he wanted students, and there's a good quote there, he wanted students to undertake projects that were linked to their own interest and experience. Okay, focus on the social issues and use project-based learning, but these projects were carefully planned and evaluated, which is the behavioral part of Kilpatrick's methods and theories. And based on all of this, he was a spokesperson for racial and ethnic equality. Again, going back to his upbringing in Georgia, the rural South during the Jim Crow era, I'm sure it had a significant impact on what he saw and recognizing the inequalities that he saw growing up, which impacted his views of education and what education should be. Now, Paulo Freire, he is an international, so he's from Brazil, and he very similar to Kilpatrick. He was born. He lived in a poor middle class neighborhood. So just like Kilpatrick, his upbringing certainly influenced the way he saw people who weren't necessarily in power, and so he saw like this oppressive lifestyle, and it certainly was an inspiration for his theories later on in life. Some of his key works, the most famous one being the pedagogy of the oppressed. These theories led to problem-based learning, which is very similar to project-based learning, except it's more about the social issues. So even though Kilpatrick did explore social issues, Freire's theories were mostly, if not completely, involved with oppression and social class and fighting those inequalities worldwide. Because again, Freire is from Brazil, so he influenced American education, but he certainly influenced education globally as well, being he's from Brazil. Um, his concern was what's called critical pedagogy, and he is associated with the progressive movement, but he was more radical in terms of his problem posing education. The term he used that is widely heard of today is the banking system. He said that's what we need to fight against, this banking system of education, and be more a dialogue between the student and teacher. So again, the banking method is this metaphor of teachers attempting to deposit knowledge into students. The reason he found this to be oppressive is because it was a lot of control and the power of knowledge, and or the knowledge of power, so to speak. The idea of just placing knowledge into students is a form of control, whereas a problem posing method teachers and students are equal in this process, and it's a dialogue, and it's about the solving of the world's problems, and that sort of is what differentiates Freire from Kilpatrick a little bit in terms of his project or problem posing method. So, for the purposes of curriculum, Kilpatrick would certainly say that it is about solving the social issues and promoting self-expression, again, going along with that child-center, activity-center theory of the progressive movement. Freire is similar in that, the child-center, the activity-centered, but it's certainly more focused on being aware of society's problems and how to take action against oppression and really using education as a liberating process. In terms of knowledge selection that goes into the curriculum for Kilpatrick, again, it should reflect the social purpose, and the student should have the greatest input because the idea is what matters to the student should be the basis for the curriculum, and then the teacher is the guide who can inform the knowledge and build that knowledge to create these purposeful activities from the real life experiences and lives of the child or the students. For Freire, the knowledge is also very student driven. The teacher is meant to be co-learning with the student, but it's more of not necessarily what students are interested in, which is a piece of it, but it's also more about these social cultural problems that the students are facing and sort of bringing to light this hidden curriculum or null curriculum, as it's been called by other scholars as well. In the nature of the learning process, again, students are very involved in terms of Kilpatrick's view. They need to learn how to learn, say what they think, really synthesize ideas, and make learning a very social process. And Freire has the same idea of making learning a very social process, and also the idea of creating a democratic dialogue. That's a good key word there. The idea of freedom of expression, freedom of student experiences, and using language as a tool to liberate from oppression. And in terms of evaluation, Kilpatrick's evaluation is about growth along social lines. So the idea is that it's not necessarily about mastery as much as it is about growth. And the idea is to prepare students for the social process of life. Freire, who's very similar in this, the evaluation is on students and teachers, and it is about solving social problems and having dialogue about these social, economic, and political problems that the students are facing. Again, going back to his upbringing of seeing oppression and using dialogue and language and thoughts to really fight this oppression. So it is a bottom-up approach for evaluation where it's not controlled. It's not the banking system that's controlled by the educator, but it really is involving the community and the students as well. And this leads to a curriculum that is never complete, continuous changing, that goes along with the global and societal changes of oppression and different social issues that arise as we progress as a society. So looking at the two of them together, they certainly are very similar. Freire certainly built off Kilpatrick's work, who built off of Dewey's work. So it really is this chain reaction of these theorists building a better curriculum theory. And they both agreed on incorporating the students in the entire learning process. So control is not solely on the teacher or the curriculist. It's about the student, the teacher, curriculus, all working together for a more equal society and education. Kilpatrick did purposeful activities, whereas Freire's vision was more about solving world problems. So much more specific towards political and social issues. Even though Kilpatrick had some of that, Freire just emphasized that a lot more. And they both were working towards fighting racial and ethnic equality. Even though Freire was more about oppression instead of racism and ethnicity, um, like Kilpatrick was. It certainly was a similar idea of, individuals who are oppressed, and that is two of the well-known curricular theorists of modern times.